All right. Hello, everybody. Let me know if you can hear me. Test, test. Can you hear me? Is there audio? Awesome. Great. Yeah, we were having a bit of audio issues, so it took us a little bit to get started. So thank you for being here. I see Connor's here and Mike and David, and we're going to be bringing up Rob real soon. So this is the last session for the online portion of Indie Week, and we flip to in-person in London, Ontario. But we do have a special session that's going to be online on Saturday at 11 a.m. It's Tour Smart with Martin Atkins. And not sure if you know Martin or have seen him talk before, but he is one not to miss. He has a ton of experience, like in play drums for Public Image Limited with Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols, 9 Inch Nails, their first major video, Head Like a Hole, he's in it. Also Ministry, Killing Joke, Pigface. So 11 a.m. is going to be a great session on Saturday. So I hope you're able to tune in for it. And like I said, this is the last Indie Week online session for the week. Other than that one, I hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you're getting a lot out of it, but it doesn't stop here. DIT is 24/7. So you'll be able to continue chatting, networking, posting, and note we have weekly webinars. Every Monday, we have 4 p.m. in the studio with John Woodland. Every Tuesdays, Indie Weekly, we have industry guests. And Wednesday, 11 a.m. is TED It with Ted Cohen, who has done everything in the business from managing Van Halen, worked with Fleetwood Mac, The Who, Todd Rundgren, just a little bit of stuff. So you don't want to miss those. And that's every week here on DIT. All right, Rob is here. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I was about to start doing sign language, but
yeah,
no sign language, so nobody understand what I'm doing anyway. So here we go.
Tough for a musical podcast, right? Yeah. Audio is kind of important.
Kind of important. All right, so this is something I've been really looking forward to. There's a lot of meaning behind what you do, and thank you for what you do. But a lot of it is getting people to know what you do and such. So let's just start with a quick intro about your background, and then we're going to have a discussion about the projects you're working on and the work that you do. So let's start with your personal background.
Sure. Yeah, most people say I want to be a musician since I was 4 years old. Not the story for me at all. My worst mark in school was music. I auditioned for the choir. I didn't make it. My voice wasn't good enough for me. I'm 6'5". I was an athlete, and that's all I knew was playing sports, and that's how I made friends. But for me, it wasn't about, hey, what I want to do. I want to play music. For me, it was my why. And what happened to me in grade 12 was me and my friends were growing up in Manitoba, Winnipeg area. We were driving too fast on some icy roads, and I was in a massive car accident, and actually was found with no pulse, not breathing, and actually met the guy that resuscitated me a little while ago. And so I went from a 6'5" guy that played a lot of sports to a guy getting bathed by his mom. And they had to, rebuild my skull with titanium, my shoulder, my chest. And so suddenly your identity is gone. I couldn't play sports, and it was quite the crazy recovery. I'm still having surgeries. And so I went through this really difficult time where I was suicidal, dealt with a lot of issues with addiction because of all the painkillers that I was put on and stuff like that. And for 2 years, I went through a lot. Like, I was terrified to fall asleep at night because every night I was having the same nightmare that I was seeing my own funeral and nobody showed up. Nobody cared that I lived or that I died. And people try to feed you all these cliches like, oh, it was fate, or, some of my family told me that God spanked me with a semi because I was a bad kid, But the biggest one was everyone said that everything happens for a reason. And people say that, I think, with good intentions, you know, like you're going to find some big reason. But that just made me plummet. Like, what's the reason I was hit by a semi? Like, thinking this is a punishment, you know. And then, yeah, it took about 2 years. And then somebody came up to me, said the most amazing thing, and it changed my life. He said, Rob, you're trying to figure out the reason you were hit by a semi, right? I was like, yeah. He goes, I think I know what it is. I'm like, tell me, man, what's the reason? He goes, I think you got hit by a semi because you and your friends were going too fast on an icy road. He's like, shit happens. What are you going to do with it? And that sounds simple, but that like set me free. Didn't have to be mad at fate or God, or I just realized we make decisions. There's going to be consequences. We're not puppets. And I realized something, you know, like, I don't think things happen for a reason. I think they happen with potential. You know, I could still be angry about what happened to me and be angry and suicidal, or there's a potential you can take your story and do something with it. And I thought, how many other young people are having those same dark thoughts that I'm having? I wish somebody would have come said something to me. So I'm like, maybe I should tell my story. And I'm like, how's a good way to tell a story? Oh, music could be a good way. So we started a band, did our first album. Man, I was ready to change the world. Looked in the audience and there was 4 people there. And I was like, where's the crowd? I want to change the world. Now I listened to our first album and I'm glad there was only 4 people there because we weren't very good. But we did a few more albums, got a record deal, some songs on the radio. But so for me, it was a why. It wasn't, what do you want to do, Rob? You know?
Wow. It's you know, when we have a big life changing incident like that, there is almost that everything happens for a purpose, but you don't want to hear that, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm relating a lot to what you're talking about, but let's sort of talk about where has that led you, because it's more than just music now.
Yeah, totally. Well, and for people in the music community, like you'll understand different portions of this, but we did 3 albums and you're trying to get a song on the radio. And me and my friends actually started a radio station. So you're starting to learn what happens in radio a little bit. And man, so after 3 albums, we got some interest. And then it was kind of interesting to see how it all unfolded, because I was like, I want to do something with it, but first I got to get a platform, right? And so our label started flying radio stations out to Vancouver and hanging out with them every weekend, you know, limos and all that stuff, all the while playing my music, saying this will be the next big thing, you know, trying to get on the radio, right? And then the weekend before they released our song, they flew all the management, all the radio stations out to Vancouver, and there's a big party. They hired Loverboy to open for us so that we look like we're huge. And then we're at this private club, and they're like, hey, Rob, we're going to introduce you. You come out and, you know, give all these guys away. There'll be 100 dudes there or whatever. And just come out and we'll give, you know, we'll say hi and then come backstage. I was like, yeah, no problem. So like, here is the man who came back from the dead, Robb Nash. And I walk out and they've got all these like sexy nurses dancing around me. And I was like, what's going on? And I was thinking, all of a sudden I realized, oh, they're using my accident as a gimmick. And I was kind of ticked. Right? I came back. I'm like, what was that? And like, dude, we know what we're doing. Trust us, you know? And I'm like, okay. So we had this whole weekend of promo and everybody's flowing home. I'll leave out some of the details of that weekend. But yeah, and then Tuesday they released our song. And, you know, it still has to be a good song, but there was so much maneuvering within getting connected to radio and stuff. And yeah, and then we started playing with all kinds of big bands. You know, we ended up having 4 songs hitting the top 10 in the charts and radio. And yeah, we saw a lot happening. And then we were getting ready to do a showcase in LA. They were going to fly us down. There was a lot of hype on us here. Like, let's be honest, like the band was called Live on Arrival because I was dead on arrival in a car accident. So we played with that. But we, like most of you guys probably haven't even heard of it or forgot about it because that was like 2009. But we had just scratched the surface of doing things, and we were just starting to get momentum in Canada. And now they wanted us to go to LA and do the same thing they were talking about overseas. And I was like, man, we're gonna go down to LA and do this nurse party all over again, and we're gonna try to. And I'm like, but when is this gonna turn into something that's meaningful? Like, I didn't want to just crowd surf, although that was a ton of fun. I wanted to like say something, right? And then when we were getting ready for the showcase in LA, all of a sudden I got a call with an offer to go through schools for 9 months, just me and my guitar. And record label's like, no, thank you, because there was no pay. But I was like, I think I'm supposed to do this. So I walked away. I didn't do the LA thing. I just, we all split up, and I just took my guitar and I started going into small schools, just me and my guitar. I'd tell my story, play a couple acoustic songs. And after that 9 months, other schools started calling, in reserves and the youth detention centers and prisons. And then I was like, so I brought my second guitar player back. So it was a couple acoustics, and then brought in a drummer. And then all of a sudden it's just started gaining momentum until we were doing like 150 shows from like October to end of May, like 2 shows a day. It was busy. I almost burnt out doing it, but yeah, it was really fulfilling because we were having some incredible conversations, because music has a way to impact people,
And for sure, it also opens up avenues of conversation, because when you do those kinds of shows, I'm sure people start opening up and sharing their stories and experiences. Maybe talk a little bit about how that sort of started happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I started writing songs. Like got songs about my own story, but I started writing songs about these students that I was meeting and inmates, and I'm like, started talking about all these different things. But one thing I never actually said from stage, like my message was like, hey, like make every day count, because you never know what could happen tomorrow. Like you could get hit by a semi like me. But I never talked about the fact that I was suicidal, because I thought like, what would people think of me? Like, what would students think? I had never even said it to anyone in my band or my family or anything. I was just like, I kept it a secret, and then one day we were called to a school in Ontario, and they said, can you come right away? Because they lost a student who took their life. And on this kid's suicide note, it revealed that she had a pact with one of her friends. Like, if you take your life, I'll take mine. And the principal said, we don't know who it is. We heard you're really good at impacting and talking to young people. Can you come right away? So we're like, so we flew out. Like, what are you going to do in that moment? Say, well, our flights are this, or we would just go, right? So we set up all our stuff, and there's 1,000 students sitting in front of me. I'm like, somebody in this audience is about to take their life, and I don't know where they're sitting. And I knew in my heart, for the first time, I had to say that I was there once myself. And I was like, holy cow. I was like, my heart was just racing. I'm thinking, shoot, was everybody going to think of me, And I got to this place, I was just like, hey, I know there's someone in this room that's thinking about taking their life. I was like, you're not alone. I was there once too. And it was like 1,000 pounds off me, And then afterwards, the discussion with my band and students, like there's this just getting hugs, and this vulnerability felt amazing. And a lot of people asking me for autographs and selfies and all that. But this one girl walks up with this paper, and she's like, old paper. And I was like, what do you want this signed, And she goes, this is my suicide note. I was going to take my life this weekend. She goes, here, I don't need this anymore. And we found her, and she walked off with the school counselor to get the help that she needed. And I was like, what the heck was that? Like, she didn't write the note during the show. She was carrying it with her. And I was like, holy crap. So I talked with some police that deal a lot with, at-risk youth and suicide prevention among teens. And they said, yeah, rarely when we come on the scene is the note freshly written. People usually write it a couple months before, and they carry it with them, waiting for somebody to push them over the edge, or waiting for somebody to reach out and say, you're not alone, say something that clicks in their gut, And so the next day there was another 1,000 students in front of me, and I was like, what if I said it again? So it was a little easier the second time when I said it. Hey, I know somebody in this room is thinking about taking their life. You're not alone. And this guy comes up and pulls out his note and hands it to me. I'm like, oh, this is now what I do. Like, this is the focus. And that was the beginning of over 900 notes that we got handed, and yeah, it's hard to describe that feeling of being able to use music to do something like that, you know, and that's one thing I say to a lot of young artists, like when they say, hey, do you have any advice? I'm like, find out why you do it. You know, like music can calm people down, it can rile you up before a hockey game, but man, have a why behind it, because that gets you through the days when there's nobody in the audience and there's no money in the bank. But this just became our focus. And then we started getting flooded with like posts on Instagram and TikTok, YouTube, and of people ripping up their notes and then tattooing the lyrics of our songs on their arms where they used to cut. And I didn't know what to do with that. Like, that's a song I wrote in my bathroom, you know, that it was personal for me, and now it's being tattooed on somebody's arm. And I didn't know what to do with that. And I was like, how do I, if I'm that much part of their story, or a lyric is, I want them to see they're part of me as well. So I took all the names and the signatures from the bottoms of all the notes we were given, and well, not all of them, because my arms are only so long, but I filled them up. And I did this because, you know, I want people to see, like, not every story of addiction ends in an overdose. Not every story of mental health ends in a suicide. Like, these are all signatures of people that had those same thoughts, and they're still here. A lot of these kids are on our team now, like, and they're so valuable. And like, I was just at the airport. We just did 3 shows at the Bell Center in Vancouver, and this girl runs up to me at the airport. She's like, oh, Robb Nash, your music means so much to me because, you know, I've been diagnosed with depression. I have suicidal thoughts. I was like, oh, I'm like, so you're like me? She's like, well, what do you mean? I said, you hurt deeply, but you love deeply, don't you? And she's like, yeah. I was like, you hurt deeply and you can see when others are hurting? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, you have what I have, and it sucks sometimes, but you can help a lot of people with that. I'm like, isn't it interesting? Like, depression is very real, but isn't it interesting that we get diagnosed with depression? Nobody gets diagnosed with empathy. There's a beautiful part of your emotion, and, you know, so often we're told, you know, take this and it'll shut that emotion off. And I'm not always against medication, but we're like, channel it. So I was like, so I looked at her, I'm like, so do you dance? Do you sing? Do you paint? And she was like, I'm a dancer. How'd you know? I've talked with over 800,000 teenagers on this tour. There is a weird connection between the arts and mental illness. Like, why did we lose Kurt? Why did we lose Chester? Why did we lose Chris Cornell, Robin Williams? Like, us artists, we're deep feelers. And when you hold it inside, I always thought I was cursed, because my friends would go through a tough day and they would just keep going. And I would get to my room, bawl my eyes out, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why am I so emotional? And then I realized that's not a curse. That's a gift. Consuelo, I can see, yeah, you feel cursed. I see the comment. I always did, until I realized all this extra emotion wasn't meant to stay inside of me. It was meant to be channeled into a song. If you hold it inside, it will overwhelm you. And I almost took my life until I realized all this emotion was a gift. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And now, like, man, like, just writing, and it's dark sometimes what I write, but I like, whether it's a painting or a song or a dance, it's like, just get it out into a journal, even if it's dark, get it out of here and onto a paper, you know. And yeah, we've met some of the most incredible people. I think we're losing some of the most gifted.
Yeah, it's yeah, sorry, I'm processing a bunch of stories in my head too, right? Yeah. But it's interesting that you can recognize and connect with these youth in such a way and have that impact. And just curious, like, how long have you been working this?
Like, we signed our record deal in 2007, and I walked away 2009. We had done a few albums before that, but yeah, it takes a while. Like, it's not like it was full time but like, if you're talking about how long I've been going to schools and stuff like that, that started around 2009, 2010. But about 5 years before COVID, we couldn't meet the demand anymore. Like, there was just so much demand, and I was almost burning out doing so many shows and talking with so many young people afterwards and taking on some of their pain. And I almost burnt out. And then what we did is we switched it up, and we started saying, what if we went to bigger venues? So we would set up, you know, in like a theater that holds a couple thousand people. In our charity, like I registered my own charity, and we wouldn't charge the schools anything for this, and then we'd say, hey, would you all come together to this venue? So we'd set up at the theater for 3-4 days, and then we'd invite all the schools, and the schools say like, oh, we'd love to come. We love what the impact you've had on our community, our schools in the past, but we can't afford to come. And we're like, well, we're not charging. And like, we can't even afford the school buses. And I just looked at my board of directors. I'm like, we got to pay for the school buses then. Let's go. And so we did. And yeah, so we would just set up and we would bring in all the schools. We've flown up to all the reserves, all the way up to Northwest Territories. It's the Indigenous people like are so unreached. You know, when we started going there, like now my base is she's Indigenous, but she's incredible. But you know, before she was on our team, when we started going to reserves, you could feel like this tension, like, what are you doing here, white boy? You know, like. But once they saw it was pure, it was genuine, and some of the chiefs had a ceremony, and they gave me my spirit name. If you get called the bear, like it's all always after an animal, and they all have different meanings. But if you're called the bear, you're the protector and the healer. And they said you've helped protect and heal our youth. So we're not just calling you bear, but bear chief. So that's why I tattooed bear and chief across the fingers. And once they people see it's genuine, it's real and authentic, they welcome us with open arms, and now we're family, you know.
Yeah, you kind of answered sort of like my follow-up question to that in, you know, I was asking like how long you've been at this, but you know, through that time, actually increase in the need or demand. And you know, I just know personally, like how many people I know that have gone the route of suicide and such. It's just, and I gotta say, I'll share this. I've never shared this with anybody, just so you know. I was in college, and a friend of mine ended up going on the road as light person, merch person for a band. And I'm not gonna say who, because some of those members are still touring in pretty big bands and such. But before that happened, there was 3 of us that were friends in high school, and one had a hockey accident. His neck was sort of sliced, and he passed away. And so there's now 2 of us as friends, and my other friend couldn't take it, and I got called in the morning. So I almost lost both friends in 24 hours. But he went on the road, and he would call me 3 a.m, 4 a.m from all over the place, and you know, not in a good place. So it's in our industry, and it's not just artists, performers, it's techs, it's road crew, managers. And I guess over the time, have you seen sort of like an increase? Is it, and I think part of it might be just awareness, because it seems for a long time nobody said anything. Nobody opened up.
Yeah.
And now I feel a lot of people are starting to feel more comfortable opening up, and now we're just sort of learning like, oh, this is rampant in our industry.
Okay.
And not just our industry, everywhere else too. So just kind of like, what has been your sort of perception on that over the years of, as people are starting to open up more? Like, it sounded like obviously moving to a bigger theater and such is an indicator, but
yeah, well, first of all, I'm sorry for what you went through, man. Like that's heavy. One thing I'll tell you, it's getting younger and younger, like in dealing with schools. Like in the beginning when we did this tour, with the grade 12s were struggling with, what the grade 8s are going through, what the grade 8s are doing was now the grade 5s, you know. But you know, you're right, people are talking more about mental health. I think it needs a lot more work in our industry, because we are feelers, you know, in the industry, artists. And you're right, everybody that's on the road, that's heavy. Not everybody lasts, you know. But I definitely think when you say, is it getting worse, is it getting better, the discussion opens up a little more. But man, COVID sure didn't help. You know, for artists that, you know, lose all your momentum, you know, like friends of ours that do our lighting, you know, all of a sudden their lighting company is just, are we going to make it through this? And I often talk about this on podcasts and interviews and stuff, but the fact that like, I was in high school when I had that car accident, and I was told to stay home and isolate and not be with your friends, and I couldn't play sports. And I know what happened to my mental health. So when COVID hit, sure, at first we thought we were all going to die, but pretty quickly we knew young people were doing okay. And I was thinking, oh shit, we're going to put everyone through what I went through when I was in school. I'm like, uh-oh, like this isn't going to be good. And it's not talked about a whole lot, or not enough, but yeah, that really affected people. And all of us, they're used to being out there performing. It's part of how we, keep ourselves fed, not just like literally, but emotionally, right? We stay fed by performing, by writing, so, and yeah, even writing with stuff. We did an album during COVID, but we were 4 guys in 4 different studios, like we couldn't even sit in a room together. But man, did I toured so much, I didn't know how much I had inside of me. I didn't have time to write, but our new album's like 18 songs, and just all these stories that I was gathering over the years, and when COVID hit, a lot of schools and stuff were saying, we need your help more than ever. I was like, well, we can't come perform. We can't bring people together and do this thing. So there's a film crew that was hired to do a story on me a little while ago. And this film crew, they were just incredible. And they said, man, we feel like our whole lives we're getting to this place to tell your story. So when COVID hit, I called them and I said, hey, people need some stories right now, stories to find out there's some hope, right? And I said, you said you want to work with me. And I said, would you help me? Let's go around the country. Let's find some of these kids. Where are they now? And so even during COVID, we could move things around. Like you could get licenses to go do some filming and stuff like that. So we followed up with 6 of these kids. Where are they now? And collected their stories, and they're incredible. And we turned it into a school curriculum that's being taught in Canada. But they said, hey, we want to make this into a documentary. And they're like, Rob, we need to tell your story through this thing. So we started working on this thing, and man, they went back to the place where I had my accident. They recreated the accident scene with the same vehicles. I had to like walk up on the scene of me getting resuscitated. Like it was like heavy. And 2 days before they shot that scene and my interview, my dad passed away. So it was tough, but it also brought something really raw out of me. And then, so we were filming this and going around the country, following up with some of these kids, and went back to my house where I grew up, my school where I got my scholarship, and where I lived in my dorm room in high school. And man, it was reliving all that was incredible and difficult. And that turned into a documentary, which is part of the reason why we're talking today, Darryl. That's going to be coming out on November 26th. In that documentary, it's heavy, and we've watched a little bit. There was a lot of edits and stuff, and we've got Stephen Stone, the entertainment lawyer, working with us on that. And and in chatting, trying to figure out what do you do with it. Is it Netflix? Is it Amazon? And he was just like, you know what, man. Everyone needs this, and everyone's got YouTube. Doesn't sound as sexy as putting it on Netflix, but we need this. We need this to be out. So November 26th in the evening, it's going to be coming out, and it's weird to watch it because normally they make a movie about you in your story when you're dead. So I feel like I'm watching my own memorial. Rob was a good guy. Like, I'm still here. Like, I would like to keep going. But yeah, November 26th. I was trying to think of a title for this documentary, and I looked at all these notes that we've been given, and almost every one of them starts with the same line. If you're reading this, ... So that's what the documentary is called. If you're reading this, November 26th. Yeah, the album that we launched just a bit ago is called This Is War. Talks about this war against mental illness, and fighting. And the album is 18 songs, and there's some songs where you're on the front lines. There's some songs where you're talking about being in triage, where you're trying to heal up. There's moments you're feeling victorious. There's moments you're just looking for an ally. And it's diverse too. There's some heavy songs, and there's some that don't even have guitars in them. I even did a cover of Last Resort by Papa Roach, just me and a piano. So it's different, but and even a Bieber cover, which I'm sure you can picture me singing a Bieber song.
Wow. So I just sort of want to talk about the documentary a little bit. Obviously tough to revisit. What did that make you yourself feel as you were going through those scenes?
Yeah, it was heavy. Like, again, going back to school, and you get used to doing a radio interview. There's the 3-minute version, the 5-minute version of telling your story. There's podcasts like this that'll be an hour or whatever we're doing. But sitting down for like a few days of like 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours. So we did like 16 hours interviews where suddenly you're starting to talk about what it was like growing up. Like, I grew up in a home that was so conservative, I wasn't allowed to listen to mainstream music. I wasn't allowed to watch mainstream movies and stuff. So reliving some of that, like, my parents had 5 kids who grew up, and while they were growing up, they were in like a bluegrass band together, like banjos and mandolins and all that, and Southern gospel stuff. They all grew up and were all moving out and having kids, and I was born. Oops. And so I didn't like music because all I heard was 4 chords or 3 chords, and then when I got a scholarship and I moved out to high school, and everybody's like, I learned a little bit of guitar. I wasn't really interested in drums, but everybody's like, oh, you play music, and can you play this? And all of a sudden they're showing me, like, I got introduced to like Nirvana and Green Day, and then I heard what Slash was doing on a guitar. I'm like, you can do that on a guitar? And then I just like, holy cow. So the documentary was interesting because it wasn't just talking about, hey, tell us about the last your career in the last little bit, but it was actually going back to the place I grew up and watching people reenacting scenes of me riding bike in Little Kleefeld, Manitoba, and it was chilling. And I'm they recreated the scene of me getting resuscitated, like, and I met that guy a little while ago. Like, this was like, a lot of my story has been told to me. Like, I had spoken at a school in the area where I had my accident, and then all of a sudden a friend of mine calls and he goes, I think I just met the guy that resuscitated you. So I went and met with him, and man, that was emotional. And that's when I found out the week before, he had taken a first responders class just in case he came across something. And then he is the first guy driving by, and he hears this crash. And then he's sitting with me, and he goes, yeah, dude, I walked up, and he goes, check, you had no pulse, you weren't breathing. That's when I found out that I'd been dead. And I'm like, what? I'm like, that's it. And he said he started, and because if your heart's not beating, even if you're cut, you don't bleed because your blood's not pumping. He said, I know your heart started beating when blood started pouring out of your head. And he said, I was trying to hold your head together so you wouldn't bleed out before the ambulance got there. And he said he would call the hospital. Him and his wife were saying, we'd call the hospital every day. Just somebody tell me, did that kid make it? But because of privacy laws, they couldn't. So for years, he didn't know if I made it. So now we got to sit down and have this discussion. And so all these pieces, in one part of the documentary I tell too, like I said before, like, I had gone through this really dark time being suicidal. And when I was done with that anger and that bitterness, I was like, I want to do something with my life. I was like, what do I do? And I thought I'd feel prompting to move to Africa and build a well or something, right? I thought I'd have to do something huge. But the first prompting I felt was to find the semi-driver that hit me and tell him that I was alive. And I was like, what? So I started phoning the police saying, like, hey, can I get the phone number of the semi-driver that ran me over? And the cops were like, no. And I was like, all right. But this voice wouldn't leave me alone. So finally one cop was like, okay, you didn't get this from me, but here's his number. Because I was just like, I think this guy needs to know I'm okay. And I called him, this big trucker from the US. And I said, hey, is this so-and-so? And he goes, yeah. I said, do you remember that car accident up in Canada a little while ago? And he got real quiet. He's like, yeah. I said, just felt that I should call you and tell you, like, I'm alive. I survived. And he starts crying. He's like, I'm just so sorry about your friend. I was like, what friend? He goes, the guy that died and crushed his skull. I'm like, no, that's why I'm calling. That's me. And I could feel it set him free. But the important part of that story isn't what happened to me. It's what happened. It wasn't what happened to him. It's what happened to me. that was the first time I ever felt significant, that I had done something for someone else. Like in the West, we're so focused on ourselves, like just like more. We're so focused on more, a nicer car, you know, a bigger house. You know, my mom's from Mexico, my dad's from Belize, and the lifestyle down there is just so different, you know, like, but here we're just so focused on just more in ourselves. And I think there's a great book called From Success to Significance. And as artists, I think we need to understand that. Like, we got to share the stage with a lot of massive bands, and you meet them backstage, and you think they're going to be so fulfilled because they live in the dream, they got the big house and the nice cars and they're famous, but not always the case, right? Like, and this book talks about not stopping at success, but moving on to significance. That's when your success actually impacts the world around you. And that's what we need to look for. And as musicians, man, as artists, every kid's got earphones in their ears. Like, let's feed them something. You don't have to do what I do, but yeah, have some why behind what you do.
Wow, you're making it hard to keep talking, Rob, after that. I
talk too much too, so interrupt.
No, that's such an amazing story, and the fact that you reached out, I think, says a lot. And I know, again, familiar type stories in those kinds of cases. You know, it's almost interesting. One story that was definitely in the spotlight was, you know, Jeremy Renner, how he got ran over trying to block like a snow removal machine to save I think it was his nephew. But he said that that's one of the best things that's happened to his life, and he appreciates every single day. And he's such a motivator as well.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that we do have these really kind of traumatic points in our lives, but we do make it through. And we often find meaning behind that.
You can.
Yeah.
But you have to decide to do that. Like, one person gets cancer and they're like, oh, all of a sudden you like, man, you realize like life is fragile and people can change their diet. They might just like have a make every day count type of thing. It just gives them a different perspective. But the next person gets cancer and goes, why me? And you get angry and bitter. And so everything happens with potential. Like, tragedy can tear apart an individual. It can tear apart a family, a school, a business, a province, a freaking country. It can tear people apart. But tragedy can also bring people together. We have to make those decisions. You know, like this has happened too many times. You haven't said this, but I've been on radio interviews where they've been like, well, Rob, it's kind of good that you were hit by that semi truck, isn't it? And I was like, no, it's not good to get hit by a semi. And he's like, well, but if you could go back in time, you'd do it all over again, wouldn't you? I'm like, I wouldn't. Like, we can learn from tragedy without question, you know, but we can learn from each other's stories. Like, I could still be, they just rebuilt my head a few years ago at the Mayo Clinic in the States, so I can still be angry. So, and he goes, well, you're young, you don't realize. One day you'll realize you had to go through this to think the way you do now. I was like, if I have to go through that to think this way, then I'll stop my tour, I'll sell all my cars, I'll get a semi-license, and I'll start running people over. Like, we can learn through tragedy, but we can also learn from each other's stories, right? And he was like, well, you know Rick Hansen? And I said, yeah. He goes, I said, like, the guy in the wheelchair? And he goes, yeah. He goes, Rick Hansen says he's happy that he's in a wheelchair because of what he's been able to do with it. And I said, that says a lot about Rick Hansen, not about wheelchairs. Like, he had to make some decisions in the midst of that, right? We will all see a traumatic moment in our life. We will lose loved ones. We will go through our own trauma for sure, but we will have to decide what we do with it. And there's something empowering about that, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. I was just sort of thinking, you know, kind of going back a bit, you know, when you were talking about COVID, our own personal experience, we lost our festival. Right. 20 years, like it would have been like 19 years. We lost our festival, our entire existence of what our company does at that point. And we started doing online conferencing. We had no idea what or how. Let's just do this. Yeah. And there was an artist that reached out because, you know, we were selling tickets, and it's like, I can't afford this, but I'd love to. And I'm like, here's a ticket. And she reached out after the 3 days crying and said she really needed this. The fact that all musicians were isolated, this was a way to still communicate and positively look forward. And it's interesting where sometimes I talk to people about doing stuff online, and they're like, oh, it's not the same as in person and it's not meaningful. I'm like, you haven't been on our sessions,
right?
You know, and I'll share this one story, and I'm not trying to turn it into our story or anything, but just sharing. There was one time we're doing Indie Weekly. We do a webinar every Tuesday. And one of our interns at the time messages me a screenshot. She said, this is what somebody's saying on socials. And it was an artist that, you know, isolated, and a lot of people were looking for validation still at that time because, you know, I'm not a musician anymore. But and they'd said, you know, we played Indie Week and tagged us and other festivals,
Right.
but then said, I'm going to go on camera today and take my life. And I'm getting this message while on webinar.
Right.
And you know, we're really proud. One of the things we did is early days, we were one of the first to hold a whole day of mental health and wellness at Indie Week. So I know some people. So I started texting, what do I do with this? Who do I contact? And we were able to get in touch with police. Intern found the location. We were able to end. Eventually, the police called back and said we found them and they're okay. So coming together as community in spaces such as this or anywhere else can lift people up and bring people together. And you know, I think sharing stories is where we find common ground, and other people will start opening and such. And I just want to recognize Consuelo shared a story as well.
Yeah,
David's got a great message there. So David, thank you.
yeah.
So the documentary is coming out, and how are you feeling about that?
Yeah, it's exciting because you know, we do what we do, and you know, we try not to charge $1 to anyone to do it, and there's really a lack of funding for mental health. It really sucks. So it's hard to describe what we do. Because the venue's filled with teenagers for the most part, right? And they did a really good job of trying to paint a picture of what it's like to see the breakthrough that can happen in an hour and 15-minute concert. And we all can have breakthrough moments. Like, we all remember a time that was a key moment for me in my life, you know, and that's what we try to do, is provide those breakthrough moments. And it's really emotional for me, my own story, of course, but just seeing these kids where they are now, and we call it like the Robb Nash family, you know, some of these people, and just knowing that, you know, walking away from a record deal, you know, like, people thought I was crazy, but man, again, it feels good to do something significant. And I know you didn't want to make it about you guys, but you know, saying you lose a festival that you'd run for 20 years, again, you had the potential to shut down, be angry, burn the whole thing down, and be bitter for the rest of your careers, right? Or you guys made a choice. Well, maybe we can figure something out. That took choice, and good on you for doing that. That's the perspective that we need to have when something hits, and more things will hit us in our lives. And that was the right attitude to have. And then look at that breakthrough story, right? Is that worth it? Was that worth all of those things? Like, that's significance. That is like, oh, and we don't always get to hear the stories of how a song that you wrote may have impacted somebody, but every once in a while you get that. But you do it because it's the right thing to do. Hopefully somebody was impacted today, and by something you wrote, something that you painted, some move that you made, you know. And man, as an industry, like, every person is walking around with earphones in their ears. They're listening to something, and it's great to write a good love song. It's great to write a hey, let's party. There's nothing wrong with those songs, but every once in a while slip something in there that matters. Like, you look at Jelly Roll, I just saw that post with him bringing out some inmates, you know, like, And when you, like, we've done these prison shows, right? When you meet somebody, the headline of this kid murdered his parents, that's a crazy headline. Then you sit down with the kid and you listen to their story, and you're like, oh, we started in very different places, you and I. I don't know that I wouldn't be here myself. We all have stories, you know? And if we listen to those stories and just don't focus on ourselves, that'll give you content to write about for a long time. And what we do now, and you'll see this in the documentary, but I will tell a story of a girl that was found by the police laying down on the train tracks in Calgary, Alberta. Met her, she was in lockdown, and this girl was a writer. And I tell her a story from stage, and I say, do you want to meet her? And she comes out and does a duet with me, and kids are like, holy crap, you know? There's a kid from a reserve in northern Saskatchewan, went up to do a show on this reserve, and this kid was like, he didn't have a suicide note, he had a book. He had written 100 pages of things that he hated about himself and what he wanted his parents to do with his stuff after he was gone. And I just looked at him, I'm like, are you glad I'm still here? He goes, yeah. I was like, somebody will say the same thing to you one day. I'm like, you got to keep going. Somebody needs your story. I said, like, don't hold your emotion in, channel. I'm like, do you like painting, music, poetry? He's like, I love music. I said, if you could play any instrument, what would you play? He goes, guitar. I said, then play guitar. And he shows me, dude, and he shows me he was born with just an elbow. He has 5 fingers and an elbow. I was like, no excuses, brother, play. 5 years later, he sends an email to our website. Thanks for pushing me. This is not going to be great audio because we're doing it this way, but it's worth it. 5 years later, he said, 2 years later, he says, thanks for pushing me. Here's me playing Metallica. He has a little knob on his elbow that he uses as a pick. Listen to this. I think he's a better guitar player than me, and he has 5 fingers and playing for a few years. So I tell his story from stage. Guess what? He walks out and does the last 2 songs with me. He can sing. So the last song, I'm like, you take it, Dylan. And I don't think I'm the next Bono or anything like that, but I think one of these or a few of these kids like Dylan might be, you know? And if I can be a small part of somebody's story like Dylan, yeah, let's go. This is about something bigger than our individual stories. I'm not here for me. I'm here for other people. Connor, Consuelo, Mike, John, Mike, David. We're not here for ourselves. We're here for other people. That is what gets you through the end of the day. At the end of, like, I have been there. I found out that I died. And I remember thinking, what was the last thing I said to my mom and my dad? What's the last thing I said to my buddies? And it sucked because I don't know what anyone would have said about me at my funeral. I'm like, man, next time my heart stops beating, I want people to say I had an impact on somebody's life. And not because I want to be talked about, but that's what you want. We're going to breathe our last breath one day. And man, as artists, we can really have an impact on the people around you. And it doesn't have to wait till you have your record deal and you have your songs on the radio. Dang, you know? And if you got 4 people in the audience, play to them like they're 40,000.
Exactly. And I've been there for people in the audience, so I know what that's like. You know, it's something that I've said before. Again, not trying to make it about me, but the very similar type messaging. We talked about this on some online sessions, especially during COVID. And when you meet somebody, one of the things that I found that can be powerful is, how can I help you?
Right.
And it's not about how can you help me, how can I help you? And when you start with that, sometimes the connections are much stronger, because I think we're in the business where it's tough is that you're always trying to promote yourself. Here's my music, here's my song, here's my show, buy some tickets, buy some merch. And that can get where, okay, am I a salesman or a musician? And am I doing the dance? But also, if you're not getting the response you're hoping for, also it's like, oh, I'm failing. And that can turn into a whole other mindset. But I find if you start with, how can I help you? They end up often helping you back.
Totally.
And that's such an interesting thing to see. And I got to say, I credit my whole career to exactly that. I'm very lucky. Now, We're kind of winding down the time, Rob, but I'm going to ask you the date again and title so that everybody here, because there's some people that joined a little bit after, and where they can watch it. And I'm going to ask you another question.
Yeah. So November 26th, it's going to be on YouTube, so everyone can see it. The documentary is called If You're Reading This. If you're looking up, or just Robb Nash, I spell Rob with 2 B's. But yeah, and can check out the music, say hi online. You know, I'm careful with my online stuff because DMs, if you might get a message back, hey, if you're struggling, if you're trying to reach Rob because you're struggling, here's the number to call, because I'm trying to be careful and not be have people think that I'm a counselor and stuff like that. But I think I think a lot of people, can relate to this, to each other's music. Arts might not be your style, but yeah, look up Robb Nash. There's videos, there's the trailer, you can see that's on YouTube. But November 26th, it's called If You're Reading This. I think the Robb Nash story, maybe, I don't know, but there's some incredible stories in there that you guys will love. And I want to say that there was a key moment for me. We were opening for Finger 11 in Edmonton. And man, I knew them when they were the Rainbow Butt Monkeys, right? So, so I was so pumped. And Paralyzed was just hit #1 in the US for 7 weeks. And it was like, oh man, congrats, guys. Like, that's huge, right? And they were still like, they were trying to get to the next level. And I remember kind of thinking like, wow, these guys made it. Like, that's what I want to be, right? And I was like, are they even realizing that's where we all want to be? And then we were opening, and then I looked in the audience and there was 15,000 people or whatever. And I remember seeing a few young musicians. You can just tell when there's a band watching you. And I looked at these 4 guys and I could tell they were in a band and they were looking at me going, dude, you made it. I want to be where you are. And I was looking at Finger 11 going, I want to be where you are. And they were probably thinking, we want to be Nickelback, or at least get those sales. and I think that's just so important. It's like, man, that journey, we're always thinking of that next step, and you don't realize somebody else would love to have already written their first. It's just a lesson, and so enjoy those steps.
Yeah, maybe what we'll do is on DIT set up a online watch party or something like that, and we'll stream it, and we could have conversation as the documentary's playing. Well,
I'll say this: so we're actually doing November 26th. It's going to be. Where are you, Darryl?
Toronto at that time, Edmonton, or Thailand.
Okay. Well, so November 26th, it's going to be 8 Central, which is 7 that's 9 for you. 8 o'clock Central, whatever that is, figure it out. I'm going to blame my head injury that I can't tell you what time zone everyone is. But I'm going to be watching it. So if you want to watch along, it's launching at that time, 8 o'clock on November 26th Central Time. Watch along, and then I'll be watching myself, the final edit there. We'll have a chance that people can throw out some questions. They're trying to figure all that out. I'll be in Toronto for the launch. We might do a little party somewhere. We're not sure. Thank you, Sue. It's 9 p.m. Eastern. You're the best. So if you want to watch along, I will be in Toronto myself. We might have a bit of a party, but I'll be watching somewhere. And if you can watch along, I'd love to see a lot of people watching it day one. That would mean a lot to us. And then there could be more of this. I'll follow up and answer some questions if people have. And these kids that are in the documentary, Dylan, the kid with one arm, he'll be watching, and you can throw out a congrats to him. He'll see those comments too. So we're working on all that. But that's the actual time. If you want to watch it together with us, that would mean the world to me.
Oh, awesome. Now, here's my last question. What's next?
What's
next?
Well, like you, we were, before COVID, we were kind of booked 3 years in advance. We knew we would be in this place. We're going to be in Edmonton for a week of shows in March, and everything was booked so far in advance. But right now, like, COVID almost shut us down. right? Because trying to stay afloat and get resources out to people. So right now we are trying to raise money to get our tour back out there, not have to charge. But we are, like I said, we just got back from Vancouver doing shows. We've got some, bunch coming up, but we have to raise money and do the venues. But we've got Edmonton coming up. We've got Calgary. We've got Northwest Territories. I just met with somebody a couple weeks ago, the new counselor up there. So we are trying to fill up the schedule. And I love that you've created a community. I think that's fantastic. And we can't invite a ton of people to what we do, but in every city we can always have a few people. If anybody here wants to be like, hey, if you're in wherever and if we can come watch a show, that'd be awesome to have a few of you come check it out.
Absolutely. And another quick question is there a newsletter that people can sign up to or follow you on social media?
Yeah.
What's the best?
So it's at Robb Nash. That's how you'll find me on Instagram, and Robb with 2 B's. And if you go to robbnash.ca, you can join the newsletter. As artists, just be aware there's a lot of people that are in our newsletter are also donors and different things. So there might be a little, hey, if you can support us, do this. As artists, you got enough to figure out to keep your own bands going. So ignore the parts about, hey, if you want to help, donate. But like, I could talk for hours about this stuff. I'll say this. I had a record deal. I had songs in the top 10. And by the way, Warner has jumped on board and they've helped us with our album over the last 2 years here, which is awesome. But even when we had songs on the radio, man, you think you get free guitar strings and guitars on. None of that happened. But since we started doing this, like one older couple, never met them before. They saw what we do and they said, I guess they got a few dollars. And if they both believe in a cause, they don't talk about it. And in the next few days, if they have the same amount on their hearts without donating it, then they'll donate. So if she thinks they should give 10 grand and he thinks 5, they don't give anything. Only if they independently hear the same amount in their hearts. A few days go by and he goes, I don't think we're supposed to donate any money. She goes, me neither. I think we're supposed to buy them a tour bus. He goes, me too. And they flew us to Nashville, Tennessee, and they bought us a Prevo with 15 flat screen TVs inside, which feels like a blessing. And it was until you have to fuel it. And then you realize that sucks. But then a trucking company said, we love what you're doing. You can have one of our fuel cards. When we booked a show to go up, there was a tragedy up on a reserve up north. We couldn't get there with our bus. And we're like, well, we got to go. And we booked these flights with a small airline called Perimeter Airlines that goes to reserves up north. And the president says, we were waiting to see if you are who you say you are. Flights are on us for you and your crew to get you any reserves up north that you can't get to with your bus. Like, do the right things and good things happen. Focus on significance, not success. And man, it'll get you through those days. Might even get you
Well, I got to start working on that. We'll see. Robb, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and your time with us, but also for what you do. It's such a meaningful work. I was going to say, like, is it a job? Is it an occupation? It's, it's just all the projects that you're doing are so meaningful. And I really look forward to seeing your story on screen, as they say, but also seeing what happens next. I'm going to definitely try to follow up and stay connected, because I'd love to be involved where we can, at least spreading the word and message as much as we can. Now for everybody, this is our last session for the online Indie Week portion of the conference. We switch. So Robb, just so you know, I'm in London because we launched a new festival. This is our second year. It's venue by venue. Now we're at 66 artists. Indie Week was at 240, so we're building. We're getting there. But yeah, so we're here in London for a festival and conference in person on Saturday, and we will have Martin Atkins on at 11 a.m. And Martin has a lot of great stories as well. So with that, everybody, thank you for participating. And it doesn't end here. The community is 24/7. Rob, you got something to say?
I know a lot of comments were made here, and I'm sorry if I missed something, but I read a bunch of it. It means the world to me. And by the way, I wasn't taking a shot at Nickelback before. I'm a fan. I know they've taken some heat.
You're from Alberta. I'm from Edmonton, so.
But yeah, and we've man, I've got such a great crew. Like Drumeo, if you know Drumeo, Jared Falk is now my drummer. He's just like, man, I love what you're doing. So thank you for creating this down the side here, a place where people in the same, whatever we're called, like you said, occupation, but I guess our passion more than anything. Thank you for creating this. And I'm sorry if I missed something meaningful on the side here.
No, absolutely. And I'm not sure if you know, Rob, just so you know, DIT stands for Do It Together. And that came out of COVID. We kind of sort of say, you know, we're taught to be DIY, which is do it yourself. And in the music business, that's one of the hardest things to do. So why don't we do this together?
I love that.
So with that, this is the closing of Indie Week Online. And Rob, thank you so much. We'll be in touch. I think that there's some more story sharing that we can do. Take care, and we'll be watching. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Darryl.
Have a good day.